Good evening, everyone. It's really good to see you, and people who joined from different places, people who joined at 6 p.m. after our official workday is over. Kudos to you. I'm really glad to see you all here, and I'm going to try to be within the 40 minutes that were allocated to me. And we're going to talk about, indeed, a very important issue of university governance. And university governance from a perspective of faculty members. And before I start, I want to just acknowledge that among our participants today, we have our colleague from the Higher School of Economics in Moscow, Dr. Anna Panova. We worked together on this presentation with her and her colleague Maria Yutkevich, who I'm not sure will be able to join today. Anna, thank you very much for joining. At any moment, please, comment or make any corrections if I go astray. All right, let me start sharing my presentation here for today. Another PowerPoint, probably not the first one for you today. And let's start. Let's start without further ado. You probably see it, and I'm going to swap this view, and hopefully you're going to be able to see the whole picture now. And if you don't, I'm just asking you to maybe unmute and tell me that you don't see the whole picture here, the whole presentation. So first of all, I just was thinking yesterday, and it seems like I've presented at this research seminar about 3 years ago. And the topic was on faculty as well. So I kind of continued this line of research because it was of my research interest. And we're going to talk about, really about two things today. We're going to talk about faculty governance in Kazakhstan, shared governance in Kazakhstan, and we're going to talk about comparison of Kazakhstan and Russian academics as far as their views on governance are concerned. Again, acknowledgement here, this is our joint work with our colleagues from the Higher School of Economics, Anna Panova and Maria Yutkevich. All right, so today's presentation outline is basically kind of follows the title of the presentation. We're trying to establish the baseline for university governance in Kazakhstan from the perspective of faculty members. And, we're going to kind of start big and funnel down to more specific, more statistical things, if you wish. We're going to start by doing a quick overview of university governance in general, why it's important, etc. And we're going to talk about the changing context in Kazakhstan. And in the second part, we're going to talk about the comparison of Kazakhstan academic views on university governance with our Russian counterparts. We're going to talk about, our context. We're going to talk about some individual responses to individual questions, and we're going to talk about this favorable governance. And we're going to talk about the antecedents of favorable governance. Okay, so as you know, the topic of university governance, just as Laura pointed out, is an important topic, and it's widely discussed, partly because there is this crisis of confidence to the governance of higher education institutions. Crisis comes from different sources, right? But its origins, I guess, or the trends that make this, crisis, make this criticism possible is that there's high demand for higher education. Some people estimate that every 1 in 5 young people across the world is in some kind of higher education. So it's a big thing. And there's growing international competition among institutions. As you know, institutions now in our small global world compete for students, they compete for funding, and the competition is quite fierce at different levels. We also have this changing higher education landscape, and it's changing as we sit here, not able to sit together. The landscape is changing not only in technological sense, it also changing in terms of, growing consumerism, that is related to, higher education, monetization, and everything. Countries also increasingly realize that in order to be successful in this, fourth industrial revolution, we talk a lot about it these days. You need to have a strong research and development. You have to have good innovation in your country. And main drivers for innovation are universities. And despite all those important things that, higher education brings to the society, brings to individuals, we still observe some declining public funding for tertiary education. When we talk about university governance, from faculty perspective, we talk about shared governance. This notion of shared governance really comes from this understanding that, highly professional organizations, if we use Amitai Etzioni's terminology, faculty are competent and they know how to run universities. They have the knowledge of how universities work. And here we take shared governance, this, basically looking at it as kind of a interdependence of mutual responsibilities among different constituencies of universities in major institutional decision making. So these are big, major institutional decisions. And we also realize that governance is critically important. This is what, findings of research are showing, that faculty believe that shared governance is very important, especially in research universities. And it brings all kinds of positive outcomes, mainly to the faculty. And one anecdote from a past long gone, I guess, almost a decade ago, when I joined the Graduate School of Education, back then it was a Center for Educational Policy, we were in the process of signing agreements with our strategic partners, the University of Pennsylvania, the University of Cambridge. And when I was working on this, it was like an epiphany to me at that time that, oh my God, this was a very symbolical and very, very illustrative for me. When we were, in the agreements, you typically have this, when you write this organization has signed an agreement with this organization. And I was really amazed when I saw this. When, we write, it wasn't like, joint stock company this or this company. It wasn't a legal official, it was a legal official name of the university, the Chancellor, Masters and Scholars of the University of Cambridge. This is where I realized, this traditional academic governance and what central role faculty, scholars play in this governance. Typically, across, I think, it's overgeneralization perhaps, but typically faculty are involved in academic decisions, and faculty, basically they decide on what to teach and how to teach it, right? They also decide things related to their colleagues, but they don't really have much of influence over budget priorities, resource distribution, evaluation of senior management. And there are certain things that, that are vague in the literature, I guess. Vague in research is one of them is really the difficulty of kind of establishing the causal link between faculty participation in governance and between institutional outcomes. And different scholars reported different things, right? McCormick and Miners, for example, believe that, shared governance was really inefficient. It was precluding universities from doing timely decisions and effective decisions. Whereas studies by Peter Eckel, who is present here today, for example, demonstrated that faculty are actually effective and shared governance is important, and faculty can make difficult decisions that are in the interest of institution. Whereas William, for example, his studies showed that in some areas, faculty governance, faculty participation was more important than in others. But all in all, if you take stock of the studies that we have, there's still a prevalence of Western contexts and a presence of focus on more of a, board members or leadership, and not as much of a focus on faculty. I'm showing here the surveys that we've done with Peter, who is present today, in the past, in 2015, where we were doing a baseline study of governance in Kazakhstan. And we looked at boards and we looked at the presidents. We never looked at faculty. So there are those kind of limitations. And now let's switch gears a little bit and talk about Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan governance has been traditionally, associated with a very strong role of the university leader, and this was in a legal sense. This was a kind of a normative standard, so to speak, because in the legal sense, all the responsibility really fell on the shoulders of the university leader, rector, typically. And faculty did participate in governance through the structure called Ученый Совет. And Ученый Совет, you don't really translate it directly, but it's more like an academic council in our sense. So it's an academic council that was up to 51 members, met pretty regularly every month, and included both faculty and students. Our later studies from, I think, 2014 and 15 showed that although those bodies were like collegial decision-making, there was still prevalence of university leadership because the rector and senior leadership team kind of played the main tune, so to speak, in some cases. What we are observing now, and what has been kind of common and evolving reform of university governance in Kazakhstan since about 2010, was this change that culminated, I would say, in mid-2018, when the new changes came into place with the public universities being converted into non-profit joint stock companies. And now the board of directors played the main governing body. Board of directors, just as in any joint stock company. But what it really is about is actually shifting this control from kind of faculty, traditional academic decision-making into this external body that consists of, not less than 5 members. 30% of them have to be independent directors, and they meet less often, but they're external to the university. And the key word here is external. They do include the representatives of the Ministry of Education, business, and other, politicians and other stakeholder groups. We still see the rector's role. Still he, that's a quote here, that he carries the personal responsibility. Ученый Совет, or the academic council, still exists, but it's a collegial and advisory body, and advisory being the key word here. So you'll see how, this pivotal change in the middle of 2018 was really kind of I think, turning point. That it gave higher education institutions increased autonomy, determining admissions criteria, establishing teacher-student ratio, structure, content of educational program. Now there's more academic autonomy, more curricular autonomy, and endowment funds started to be created. And additional powers, a lot of additional powers, such as setting tuition levels at the institution, determining admission requirements, creating departments, creating legal entities. And this year, like end of last year, about December, the new law is, amendments to the law from 2021. Every institution of higher education is going to issue their own diplomas, which means this responsibility for the quality of diplomas is now shifting to institutions rather than to the Ministry of Education. Because in the past, all the diplomas of higher education used a similar standard, and it was kind of conferred by the Ministry of Education and Science. So those are big steps towards autonomy, big steps towards giving institutions more freedom. But today we really talk about faculty perspective here. We talk about faculty perspective. Other studies talk, and including the studies that we do, talk about how important this external governance is. But look what happens to the role of the faculty. Now that we have this new structure with the Ministry of Education and Science or the Ministry of Healthcare, in some cases there are different ministries that having 100% of the stock and having the board of directors actually deciding on key institutional decisions. There's also the president's office, and then we have this academic council, Ученый Совет, which still exists, but again, remember it's advisory body now, and it's not anywhere high in the hierarchy here of decision making. So to conclude this, first part about Kazakhstan context, what I would like to say is that establishing the baseline exercise was an important exercise, and I think it was really important, but more research would be needed because the context in Kazakhstan has changed, and it's changing as we speak. Those things, that were approved in 2018 have really just started to kind of roll out to the fullest. So now let's shift the end of part one. There's no break between part one and part two. And let's go to an interesting comparative things. So first of all, let's establish, we kind of talked a lot extensively about Kazakhstan because today's talk is more about Kazakhstan, of course. But it's important to also give some contextuals about the countries that we are going to compare. And two wonderful countries, Russia being the largest country in the world, Kazakhstan not being small as well. Density of population, I think, is not very high in either of the countries. Both of the countries we speak Russian language, and in Kazakhstan, we speak Kazakh language as well. And both countries were the former Soviet Union countries, parts of the former Soviet Union countries. And countries have in terms of education, higher education context, countries have, at different times, they have accepted some international declarations. Some, for example, Bologna is a central one for our kind of European, as we say, European educational sphere or environment. In Kazakhstan right now, the number of universities is decreasing because some universities have been closed for quality reasons. Some actually just recently, there was one institution that had 34,000, I think, students that lost its license. So in the south of Kazakhstan. So in our countries, there are different, status distinction universities. So like the top universities would be national and national research universities in Kazakhstan, and federal and national research universities in Russia. But central here is that Russia has been considered one of the most centralized systems among its peers, whereas Kazakhstan has been trying to modernize its governance system and move from the centralized ministry control to actually give an institutional autonomy to institution. And they've done it by creating the boards, creating and empowering the boards, governing boards. The boards were different, and it's a long story. Unfortunately, we don't really have time for this long but interesting story. But now we have the governing boards in the form of boards of directors. Now, having set the context, let's talk about what Anna and Maria and myself were thinking about exploring in this study. We wanted to see of what are the antecedents of what we call a favorable governance climate. We came up with this term. I don't know if it appears anywhere else, but we just thought it fancy. And we think that this term actually kind of explains what we're looking for here. And the interesting thing, and why we were able to compare those countries, the kind of a rationale is that in the past we had the similar university governance structures. As you know, Soviet Union was pretty centralized system, and now since independence, kind of trying to operate under different conditions. So we looked at different research questions, and I'm really going to start talking about the first one, about really, generally what faculty think about their leadership, what faculty think about collegiality and other things related to governance, and then really talking about what are the antecedents of favorable governance in those two countries. And what are kind of, different things like departmental, how does the level of influence of faculty over decision-making, how does it affect the perceptions of university of of governance climate? And we also looked at, whether work in terms of distribution of time between research, service, and teaching actually has any effect on perceptions of governance. And then a simple but interesting question is governance climate better in Russian or Kazakh universities based on faculty perceptions of governance? And now I have to talk a little bit about this interesting project called APEX, okay? It's called Academic Profession in Knowledge Society. It's a huge survey. Right now, this is where the data comes from, our data. Right now, it's more than 20 countries that joined their forces, collected data using an identical instrument, and now are able to compare, data, do all kinds of comparative studies. Right now, it's more than 43,000 observations, as far as I know, and the data set is growing. So we were able, with our Russian colleagues, to do this study together. And as you see the sample of 1,500 Russian academics from Russian institutions and 946 academics from Kazakhstan institutions. And in Kazakhstan, we collected it throughout the country. More than 40 institutions participated, and some of them were those leading research universities. So now let's talk about some kind of general things that we found, right? General non-statistical things. I see some interesting discussion happening in the chat. I hope I'll be able to read it later. This is great. I think there are some interesting nuggets there. But here on this slide, you see that it's kind of straightforward, logical, right? But we see that faculty tend to have influence over decision making, mainly at the department level. And as kind of level, grows or extends to the school level, to institutional level, they feel less influence over decision making. So about 3/4 at the departmental level, and then half of the faculty believe that they have some influence, and then really looking at the institutional level, only 30.9% believe that they're influential. This is logical, nothing surprising there, but it also goes in line with earlier studies that looked at similar issues. Now there's this comparison of a proportion of answers that whether agreed or disagreed with certain statements or felt neutral about certain statements. And as we see here, overall, as you see, more than half of the 62.7 participants talked about, in Russia, agreed that there was competent leadership. About a little bit, slightly more than half, that there's good communication between management and academics, and collegiality had a lower score. Why those things were important? We believe were important because literature shows us that these are important things for, for faculty well-being, for different outcomes, institutional outcomes, etc. And overall, as you see here, pretty consistently, Kazakhstani academics appear to have quite favorable perceptions on those, about leadership, about collegiality, communication. And one thing to notice as well is that what we really see here is that collegiality in Russian universities is actually less than collegiality in Kazakhstan universities here, quite significantly. So oops, I have to stop drawing because I was trying to do some fancy things, but Zoom doesn't like me doing this. And then there were other questions related to, what I put in the parentheses here, negative statements. So academics in both countries actually agreed that there was a predominantly top-down management style. And in both countries, there were concerns about cumbersome administrative process. And I think this kind of maybe relates to our past where, quite bureaucratized, kind of systems of running universities and, and paperwork and different things. But an interesting thing here, when I was looking at the results a couple of days ago, I was really, kind of surprised here to see that while majority of faculty actually believed that that the leadership in their institution is competent, at the same time they reported a top-down management style to be, agreed with that they had top-down management style. So it led me to think about, so a top-down management style in our context, and again, this is contextually interesting, I think, may not necessarily be associated with incompetent leadership. On the contrary, we see that perceptions of competent leadership correlate with the perceptions of top-down management style. And, the chi-square test, and we see that the Kramer's V of 0.148, it does tell us something. And I think it's just kind of a hint of what might be the future research. I don't know. But I found it interesting and, certainly something to talk about in the future. So this is very preliminary. So end of part 2. Oh my God, I just need the curtains to open and close here. So now we're shifting gears again, and we're talking about the more kind of, how to say that, explanatory, right? We talk about exploratory quite a lot, but now explanatory things. Again, repeating the research questions here, really starting from question 2 to 5, we looked at those different things that could be the antecedents of a favorable governance climate. And we had several models. We had several models in a stepwise regression. In the first model, we included individual characteristics such as gender and age, as well as professional factors, what we called. But basically, whether this person belongs to a STEM discipline versus non-STEM, versus whether they're oriented towards research or teaching, whether they, their academic rank was certainly important. And on the second model, we added the work distribution. So really here, the balance of this, 3 pillars of faculty work. Not the balance, but kind of different workloads there. And the third model included the perceptions of influence, the things that I've showed you before, and job satisfaction, because job satisfaction was an important correlate, and we believe that it was important to include it. And in model 5, we added whether the country is a dummy variable, country Russia versus or not Russia, Kazakhstan in this case. So just quickly, the correlations, there were some correlations here and some correlations. Obviously, the significant ones and maybe stronger ones are shown in green color. But really, the good governance climate was positively associated with influence and satisfaction scales to the medium effect, and negatively with academic seniority. But I think it's going to be clear once we talk about the different scales we used in our research. So first of all, the scale of the level of influence. This is what I showed you in the first table, is how influential a person is at different levels. The second one was job satisfaction, also a composite latent variable with employment situation, work situation, overall professional environment. And our main point of interest, the variable of interest, was the institutional governance climate, our outcome variable, and it consisted of four items. It was a competent leadership, strong emphasis on institutional mission, good communication between management and academics, and collegiality in decision-making process. So all those things that research shows us that are important for governance. Again, here the model, and I'm gonna, after this slide, I'm gonna demonstrate the model itself. And you will see that in model one here, as you see, the model one included, and let me reiterate, it included some, annotate, yeah, I'll try to like be fancy. So as you see, the model one, included variables related to gender, age here, research versus teaching orientation as a dummy variable, STEM versus non-STEM, and senior versus junior faculty. And as you see here, overall, the model is not a very good fit. The R square is really small, doesn't really explain the variation in our outcome variable very well. You see that among statistically significant ones is the senior faculty tended to report lower scores on the favorable governance scale. So in our second model, we included variables related to the work structure of faculty. So our initial thinking was that maybe, just maybe, like hours of administrative work would kind of lead to either positive or negative. And we see here indeed, to a pretty small, so almost negligible, right? Almost negligible beta coefficients here. So we really didn't find any kind of important prediction there. In our third model, that's where we included our influence scale and satisfaction scale. So influence scale, I reiterate, was the level of influence at different levels of the institution. And and as you see, there's a positive, beta coefficient of 0.24 when it comes to, so what it means really is that people who believe to be more influential in the organization also reported higher scores on favorable governance scale. And those people who were satisfied, and I guess that's again kind of a non-causal relationship there, also reported higher scores of favorable governance. So satisfaction was there an important predictor. And on the fourth model, we included the dummy variable of Russia versus Kazakhstan, and we see that in Russia the the perceptions of favorable governance were lower, and the beta coefficient of -0.38. So as a summary of what we found, right? The summary of what we found very briefly. First of all, faculty in Kazakhstan generally reported more positive views on the governance in their institutions. Interestingly, in context of Kazakhstan and Russia, competent leadership was associated with top-down management style. So this would maybe kind of counterintuitive sometimes to Western institutions or Western contexts, where more participatory governance, more kind of participatory leadership, servant leadership is considered to be more more competent or more professional. And while most faculty report some level of influence at departmental level, again, their level of influence decreases as they go into higher institutional levels. And individual and professional characteristics, except for maybe seniority, were not good predictors of favorable governance climate. Similarly, the work time distribution was not a good predictor either. And academics who exerted more influence actually reported more favorable governance perceptions. Senior academics and STEM faculty showed particularly low scores on favorable governance scale, and Kazakhstani academics reported better governance climate than their Russian colleagues. And we're trying to kind of think about why this happened. Why do Kazakhstani academics report better governance climate? We can think about several things. Maybe, just maybe, there was a more aggressive governance reform in Kazakhstan towards, higher university autonomy, with the creation of the boards, kind of shifting this decision making to institutional level, giving more academic freedom to institutions, kind of getting rid of this universal curriculum, and making it more flexible, making just a small fraction of, for example, curriculum is obligatory and the rest upon institutions' discretion. And this whole kind of evolution of governing boards in Kazakhstan, or maybe some other factors. And we have to say here, one of the limitations was that data in Kazakhstan was collected with the help of BSAM Central Asia company, using the copy, which is a computer assistant personal interview. And so a person would interview another person using a tablet. And whereas in Russia, these were online questionnaires. So there might be this interviewer effect or social desirability bias or some other cultural aspect. Causal link still remains, I think, to be identified, because it's really difficult to identify whether governance is effective, and how do you gauge it, right? What is effective governance, and how do you know it's effective? Is it that the institution's budgets are growing? Is it that enrollment is growing? And in a lot of cases, there would be a lot of spuriousness, right? And a lot of lack of clarity there. But what I think, my observations from those years of research, I think that initially we proclaimed the principles of shared governance, and it was in the programs, right? In the state program for educational development, we said principles of shared governance. But I think over time, there was this move to more like a new public management type corporate governance with external boards, external people, not necessarily academics, not necessarily educators, business representatives, other stakeholder group representatives that are making major institutional decision making, institutional decisions. So I think, although university autonomy typically think about as a very positive thing, from a faculty perspective, I think that could be a double-edged sword, where faculty would be losing some of the powers over institutional decision making. I'm going to stop here, and this slide with references and our latest publication. By the way, this was again Anna Panova, Maria Yutkevich, and other colleagues here. We just published a piece that comes from this big survey, the Academic Profession Knowledge Society, and we looked at faculty societal engagement in comparison of 4 countries. Anyway, thank you so much. I hope there are questions. I hope there are not many. I hope at least half of you are awake. And thank you so much.
Yeah, all awake. Thank you so much, Darkhan, for this wonderful and engaging talk. Now let me announce the start of the questions and answer session by incorporating the discussion in the chat. And once again, I would like to welcome Dr. Peter Eckel from UPenn and Dr. Anna Panova from HSC, Russia. So you're welcome. If you might want to share some of your perspectives or comment on the presentation. And all the participants, you're welcome. Please feel free to ask any of the questions. You can ask your questions in the chat. You can drop them there or take the microphone and ask them directly.
I see that one question just popped up from Batar Khan. I wonder if there's any way to measure the honesty or respondents' replies. I guess that's a great question. We are taking everything possible. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, the question is just, to make it clear to the audience, it's more about the reliability and validity, right? A more methodological question, right?
Yes, and it's a great question.
Yeah.
And we take all the necessary steps to avoid, those kind of validity threats, threats to internal, external validity. Frankly, there are more experienced colleagues here that may have the answer, but I do not know how you check the honesty. You know, you sometimes in some cases you have, for example, missing data, right? Where you can actually deal with the missing data. And in some cases, you would actually be able to see. In some cases, you would actually be able to see that the person just didn't do, didn't respect your questionnaire. And for example, just there's a pattern maybe, or bias, response bias in how they responded to your question. So in these cases, we certainly look at it, when data cleaning, we do a pretty thorough job there. But, in the general sense, kind of a big picture sense, rather than those kind of post factum, I don't think, you're really able to make sure that they're absolutely honest. And maybe that's just my kind of positivist bias here, but great question. I don't know if somebody else wants to join in this discussion. That's great.
Thank you. Yeah. Any other questions? You can turn your microphones on now.
Hello, this is Feli.
Hello.
Thank you. It's an interesting study, I think, and an important on an important topic, obviously, faculty governance. I wanted to ask if perhaps you checked for, given the differences in context between Russia and Kazakhstan, if when you build your statistical models, I saw you presented results from 4 different models. Did you, I wanted to ask if you tested for maybe interaction effects between your dummy variable and some of those other factors, especially the influence scale and the satisfaction scale, just to see if there is a difference depending, if the effect or the relationship depends on the country context, on whether the respondent is from Kazakhstan or Russia.
Yeah, if I understood it correctly, Feli, and it's good to meet you for the first time, I think, online. So we think initially we thought about, about the interaction effects, about moderation that might happen. And primarily we were thinking about, the seniority of faculty. And because we kind of were of the, assumption that the more senior faculty would exert more influence. This was in our initial plan, but we didn't follow through with that plan. We did include, as you were seeing in the last model, we didn't include the country level variable of, Russia versus Kazakhstan. And we did separate analyses on both data sets, but in the end we, merged the data sets together and run those models on our on our joint data set with consistent results. So, I don't know if it answers your question, but I think we had discussions about this. We had discussions. We had quite kind of complex models that we wanted to do with maybe structural equation model or something of that nature. But it's our first steps in analyzing the data sets from a comparative perspective. So we thought we would start and do something more simple at this stage. And
yeah. I think it will be interesting. Yeah, I think that was going to be my next question. I think it will be interesting. Since you are also interested in exploring potentially causal effects, to do something like structural equation modeling, perhaps at some point. And I think that will be very helpful in really trying to sort of identify those causal factors that might be into play. But it's definitely an interesting study. I'd be interested to look at your published article. So thanks.
Thank you, Feli. And this is great to get this kind of evaluation from you, because I know that you deal with data every day from 8:30 a.m. until 5:30, and probably even later. I know that. I know that.
Yes,
and
that's my world.
and I just saw some interesting, thing popping up, like the question, or I guess the comment from our colleague Matthew Courtney from Graduate School of Education, who actually said, "What about HLM?" And I think the beauty of this data set is that. Oh, let me stop sharing, because I think.
No, you are not sharing.
Oh, I'm not sharing. Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
So. The nice thing about this data set is that we actually know which institutions we've interviewed. So institutions are identified by the numbers, and we know whether they are, whether the size of the institutions, kind of whether they public, private, or national, which means we can actually kind of build this data set even more, right? We can add those institution level variables and actually do the hierarchical linear modeling, just as Matthew is suggesting here at some point. But, time is, unfortunately, we don't sometimes have time, to do those additional steps. And this is certainly something for the future. I think, both your, Feli, and Matthew's suggestions are really, really valid and interesting. Thanks for them. I made notes.
Let me read out some of the questions in the chat. So Peter is asking, is the data set large enough to look at within country findings, such as at the institution as the unit of analysis?
Institution as the unit of analysis, on average, I think we see because we had more than 40, I think 43 institutions participating across the country. I should have probably asked for more institutions to be more participants to be included in the study, but there's this kind of balance between what money you have and time and all those very things. And we did personal interviewing, which means we were kind of had some limited time and limited opportunity there to collect data. But I think, Peter, to answer your question, in some institutions, there were 10 participants. In most institutions, I think on average, it was about 15 participants from each institution. So not that big of a sample, based on the institution. So I don't know at that level whether it's going to be possible. And whether it's going to be valid, because it wouldn't be enough of a sample size, I think.
Well, maybe there's a different way to kind of think about framing some of this work. If you shift the unit of analysis to an institutional level, because my sense, and I threw a couple of quotes in the chat, that a lot of issues around effective governance, and I think the tension you identify between the top down versus the feelings of collegiality is a really interesting dynamic, because it's based on individual expectations, and to what extent does the decision-making processes align with individual expectations. And at least in the US context, where we see great variation across institutions, the institution-specific elements is what really matters around this function. So I wondered if you can start to tease out some of that, and it may not be across all the data set, but maybe identifying, those 15 or 20 institutions where we have the most data, and then start to look at within institutional elements, just to be able to kind of tease some of those out. Birnbaum has a great quote about, shared governance is actually effective if and when people say it is. And so that may help explain some of that tension. At least that's a concept you may want to tease out in your discussion that you talked about. And since I have the camera, the second piece that I think is really interesting to really do some more thinking about is this kind of dual trends that you've got. The autonomy has done two things. One way, it has pushed particularly Kazakh universities towards more shared governance and devolved decision making. But at the same time, it's taken away from the traditional kind of academic council model to an external body for the fiduciary responsibilities. So it's both added empowered faculty and disempowered faculty at the exact same time. I think that's a really interesting dynamic, to explain and explore, but also just to think about is how does that impact the findings? Because I think that the transition aspect of governance, particularly in the Kazakh context, I think is the really interesting one to explore. And then, I think you're really onto this kind of dual tensions that are actually pulling in two opposite directions.
Thank you very much, Peter. You, as nobody else, can conceptualize this.
Yeah,
And,
don't talk to me at all about structural equation modeling. However, if you want to talk about conceptualization and the big picture and how all these mushy things function, I'm happy to do that. It's good you've got lots of diverse thinkers on this call.
And Darhan, let me reiterate Matthew's question or comment. Within and between university interaction effects, what about nested structure of data?
Again, we didn't look at it. Although we have the power to do it. I guess we need to do a little bit more work on the data set. Things like we have the universities identified there. For now, we have done analysis based on not an institutional level, but institutional type level, right? So we were able to compare private institutions versus public institutions, for example. Then we also have this distinction for the article that we just published, that showed in the last slide. We had this distinction of vertical stratification. So national, like kind of leading research universities versus kind of mainstream universities, right? So to see how if there's this vertical stratification actually has. So I think there is opportunities for this, and I'm so glad that Matthew is my neighbor, five floors down, basically right under. So I'm gonna.
Neighbors.
I think I'm gonna hijack his brain for extensive discussion there.
Right. Here, among our participants, we have Aynagul Ismagulova. She's the Dean of the Faculty of Foreign Languages, as was mentioned before, from Kokshetau State University. And here is her comment. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. The study is relevant. I'm interested in seniority level and institutional level as well. And what do you mean by other cultural issues?
That's a great question, and Aynagul, happy birthday to you. And thank you for spending time on this day with us. So to answer your question about the seniority, yes. So for us, to us in both Kazakhstan and Russian data sets, we identified senior faculty as those having job titles, I guess, comparable to associate professors and full professors. They were considered senior. So as you saw, that senior faculty were actually reported lower scores on what we call the favorable governance scale. So I don't know what the explanation for this could be. I just wanted to say, Aynagul, that in Kazakhstan data set, there are 73 participants that were not included in this study because they hold academic administration positions. So deans, vice deans, those kind of administrative positions, they were taken out of the data set, so we could only talk about faculty. But my next step at some time in the future would be to look at academic administrators and see, what they think about, or how do they fare in institutional governance. We specifically didn't include them in the data set. We took them out of the data set, but there are 73 of those, and I'm going to be curious to see if that's what you mean by seniority there and senior staff. So I don't know if this answers your question. And the second part of the question about the cultural issues, not issues, I would say aspects, and I apologize if I said issues, but as a potential explanation, there could be, again, this interferer effect, and plus this kind of culture of maybe a more Eastern, I hate to say that because it's not really a good generalization, but to not be very critical of your leadership, for example. So, and there could be potentially one of those cultural bias, I think, of respondents to either not be critical or maybe thinking that the results of the survey will somehow be leaked, and and the leadership would learn that you were not thinking, the things about potentially, in any survey there's this threat. So that's why what I meant by, other cultural factors. And I'm not suggesting that in Kazakhstan it would be different than in Russia, but there's one potential explanation for this.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, we just have a few minutes left. So, dear colleagues, if you have any other questions left not addressed before, please feel free. Any comments, questions?
I was just curious. I mean, what kind of response rate did you have on this survey? Because I haven't really seen many cross-institutional surveys in Kazakhstan so far. So I attempted to do one myself, like a couple of years ago, but to look at institutional research issues, but it was not, frankly, successful. So, what kind of response rate did you get, and did you sample like individuals to be surveyed, or what kind of sampling strategy did you use? Oh,
Darhan, maybe. Oh yeah, Darhan is back. Darhan.
maybe he didn't.
Yeah, maybe.
Get my question?
I think hello?
Yeah, we can hear you. Maybe internet connection was unstable. Mm-hmm.
Did you get my question, or should I repeat it?
I think Darhan got the question. He was trying to respond.
Oh, okay.
Okay, let's then wait.
Yeah, it looks like we lost him. You could put it in the chat, because then it'll be, you could then point him to it as well.
Yeah.
So Feli, maybe I can give some feedback to you. So at GSC we do surveys and interviews with institutions in Kazakhstan, and usually in doing surveys it's still very helpful to use some administrative networks. So there are some association of rectors, there's some various association of rectors, or approach the Ministry of Education. They have those WhatsApp chats or other communication channels. The administrative networks is very helpful in reaching out the respondents.
Okay.
Hopefully we can get back Darhan, right, until the end of the seminar, at least to say goodbye. All right, so please be reminded that this recording will be uploaded on the YouTube channel of NUGSE. So there is our YouTube channel, and all these recordings and the previous research seminars are there. Okay, all right. Thank you, Aigirim. Okay, so
If I can just take this opportunity to tell to Peter that I'm delighted to meet him virtually. I had read a lot of his work when I was a graduate student at the University of Minnesota 10 years ago. So
I'm very sorry about that.
It's nice to put a face on your name. So
thank you. Thank you, and I look forward to these. This is a great conversation, and the joys of Zoom is that we can participate from different time zones in different countries. But I am ready to have coffee with all of you back once we can get back to NU's campus.
Wonderful.
Thank you. So, Feli, do you work at NU? Or do you
I
study?
work at NU in the office of the provost. I'm the head of institutional research and analytics.
All right.
Well,
So
my expertise is mostly, my PhD is in higher education policy and administration from the University of Minnesota. And I do a lot of survey research, and I'm interested in experimental kind of studies to explore factors that impact students' academic performance. We do a lot of surveys.
So you can then email Darhan, right? If you still need some response to your previous questions, right?
I think I'll get in touch with him, because I think it would be nice to get to know each other better, and maybe we can find potential areas of collaboration in the future. Yes.
All right, then. Okay, I will not be taking.
You forgot, Feli, when you listed your expertise, you forgot how well you play football also.
Isn't it, from what I understand, isn't that the #1 hiring criteria at NU these days? Is can you play football? And preferably in the snow.
Thanks, Zaki.
Darhan, great job.
Hello, I'm sorry. My computer recently fell victim of a big fall from my children, and it's now kind of wobbly a little bit. And something's wrong with the Wi-Fi once in a while.
Oh, I see.
I just noticed there's a comment there from Bakari that about wanting to interview you, Darhan. So perhaps.
For a position, I have signed a 5-year extension on my contract with Nazarbayev University.
I suspect it might be a different type of interview.
Yeah, certainly. My email is, I'm going to write my email here.
In the chat.
And I mean, and I apologize for, losing this connection for, I don't know, 5 minutes.
It's okay. So, if we don't have any other questions left, so we know your email and that the recording will be on the YouTube channel. So Elaine, please. Yeah.
And I just thank you, Laura. It's always important to recognize the fabulous work that you do, Laura, with organizing our research seminar. And if anybody has a topic that they would like to have a seminar about, or even better, if they have some expertise that they would like to share in one of our seminars, then you can contact Laura. Laura, I wonder if you can put your email also in the chat.
Sure.
Laura organizes and runs and MCs these sessions in a fantastic manner. So we're grateful to you, and we're always grateful to people of Darhan for offering your expertise to us.
Thank you so much, Elaine, for reminding me. Yes, by the way, I'm always hunting for great speakers. Yeah, please feel free to email me if you have an interesting topic for a talk. So then let me thank all the colleagues for your time. Thank you so much for your time, for your great questions, for your attention. Please stay with us with our monthly research seminars, and have a good evening and have a good day, Peter. So the seminar is over.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Anna.
Bye.
Thank
Good job.
Peter. Thank you, all the people who came. That's been a really pleasant experience. Thank you.
Bye.
I can see.
Nelly, get in touch with you, right?
I'll get in touch with you, right?
Great.
Right.
Thanks.
Bye.
See you.
See you.